welcome back, Sideboard Podcast listeners. This is your host, Caleb Williamson, checking in.
How's it going, guys? This is Tim Clunt, and we have a special guest today.
Hey, guys, it's Russell Stelzer, part of the Worlds team. Thanks for having me. These are two of my really good friends, so of course I was 100% down to come on this podcast when you guys asked.
Yeah, we appreciate you coming on. I mean, sometimes we like to have guests on here because it brings like a third opinion on a lot of the topics we discuss. Because sometimes, as our listeners know, me and Tim are polar opposites on things. But anyways, let's get into our topics for today. So the main thing we're going to talk about is kind of just how to have fun while being competitive in card games in general, but mainly Dragon Ball because that's kind of what we all play. But so just basically like how you try to have fun or what is fun to you about card games while being competitive. So yeah, let's just start with that. Like what do you find fun about being competitive in a card game?
Well, I know for me personally, I am someone that just naturally gets bored of things really quick.
Right.
So I always have to keep things fresh with anything I do in life. I always love to be on the move and try new things. So with me in card games, I love to just play different decks. There's never really one deck that I've ever really played for an extended amount of time, especially at like locals, even on like the competitive level. For like my first, who knows how many, like 13 events, I played a different deck at every event. And for me, it just like it creates a challenge of where like I want to do good with multiple different decks instead of just like dominating with one deck. And it just, I don't know, it keeps things interesting for me. So that's like my number one thing with like having fun is just always mixing it up.
Yeah, for sure.
Kind of a good point. It helps you to be a more well-rounded player also.
No, I definitely agree with that. A lot of times, especially in Dragon Ball, like the metas typically are more diverse than most like big TCGs that you see. And so kind of just like knowing the ins and outs of every deck is one way to perform more consistently.
Absolutely. I mean, even like right now, we don't have a lot of big, like we don't have any in-person events. We have some decent online events, but there's, I would say, like a solid 10 decks you could play to like do well or even top an event. And
Definitely.
so just, keeping variety. Also, it's fun. Like you said, playing a different deck each day or, trying out new things is part of having fun. What about you, Tim? What playing competitively in a card game is fun to you? Like, what does that mean?
All right, so you guys know I like to get those W's. Although when we were all in San Diego, I took an entire weekend of major L's. But playing competitively for me is honestly, it's less about like what I'm playing with on the table and more about like me playing chess in my head versus my opponent's head. Because I know like Caleb, I talk about a lot having come from playing like Modern and Legacy and Magic, which is 100% a battle of the brain. So that's like kind of what I'm more accustomed to. So I feel like having matchups like that. So in this game, it would be, I think the closest thing would be like playing mirror matches, which I know a lot of people hate, but I love playing mirror matches. That kind of stuff, it kind of like fuels and drives me and helps me to be a better player. But also kind of like what Russell said, I like to try and diversify what I play. That way when I go to a big event, I'm better prepared for every matchup.
Yeah, it just correlates with the term that we call the jungle in competitive card games, where the first few rounds of Swiss, you could go against a lot of different decks. The casual players that are playing, they could match you up in round 2 or something, and you'll just play like this jank deck. And so you need to play decks that are similar to that, like even just at locals, go have fun, play a different deck, because sometimes they have like these weird combos that can just blow you out of the water, but they're just not that consistent. But if that combo goes off and you weren't prepared for it, you might just lose, even though you're playing like the quote unquote best deck.
Yeah, so I think a really good example of that, at least for me, was at TOP weekend. when I decided to take Black Boo for the whole weekend. And I literally played against nothing but like the top 3 decks Friday and Saturday.
So you were that person.
I was the jungle, and I was turning some heads.
Yeah, I mean, me and you got sat next to each other like round 3 or something. We were both 3-0, or so that would mean round 4 actually. But
Yeah.
we sat at like table 2 and 3, and I think your match was like 8 minutes or something like that.
Yeah, my game 1, it was over when Caleb and his opponent were going to their second turn of game 1.
That's gross.
It was just
it was pretty busted. But like, I looked at the meta and the top decks at the time and was like, okay, what can I play that's gonna beat that? Because everyone pretty much knew like Invoker and Surge Piccolo were gonna be like 80+% of the field in Vegas. So I really didn't have to worry about other matchups.
Right.
So I think that's another thing with competitive play is kind of understanding like at each event what the meta is, if it's diverse enough to where you can't really take a glass cannon deck, or if it's, you know, only 1 or 2 top decks and no one's really playing anything else. It makes it infinitely easier for you to play a deck like that.
Yeah, I agree. So moving on to something I find fun in competitive card games. One of the things that I think like is the most fun level of competitiveness in an event is when you get to this point where like you and your opponent have mastered your decks and you know exactly what you're going to do, and you get to this like level of skill where it's all about RNG and psychology. And you know you get to have this like conversation with your opponent, just throwing like brain jabs, I call them, where like they're funny questions or comments or whatever, but you're kind of like getting information based on how they react, and then all these sorts of things. I don't know, I just find that stuff kind of fun because neither of us need to worry about, you know, like, oh, you misplayed that card. It's like, no, we know the rulings in and out. We're just here to essentially it comes down to RNG. You know, coin flip is a huge deal in Dragon Ball, and then you know you get to have fun with having a conversation with your opponent.
Yeah, I think that's what I missed most about locals is I do that to like everybody I play against, and people hate it.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing about online versus real life is like with online events, you know, you don't get to look at your opponent in the eyes. You don't get to like see their body movements, how they react during different situations, and also just getting to like see new people, right? I know, especially on like stream matches, you know, stream matches historically, you see a lot of people misplay just because some people hate being on camera, or some people who've never been on camera before sit down, they just get really nervous. Like I've sat down in front of a player before, and after the match on stream, he was like honestly, like I couldn't concentrate during that match because we were on camera. And I know me as a player, I love when the pressure's on. You know, I come from a very big competitive background, whether it be card games or sports, my entire life. So I love those pressure moments. You know, I love being on stream. I love being able to like look my opponent in the eyes. That's fun for me, you know, and not having that in person experience, I think has been the hardest thing about this whole pandemic.
Exactly. That's kind of where I was going, was just like the people aspect, you know, you don't have that anymore. Um, I mean, maybe if you're like on Discord with the other person, but that's, you know, that's minuscule compared to like actual in-person events. And I think that's what I find most fun is actually going to the event, playing, having fun. Playtesting the night before is always great because everyone is just scrambling for last minute techs and all this stuff. We stay up way later than we should, and you know, just a whole bunch of laughs and all that, good times basically. And then we get to play a bunch of Dragon Ball, and then the best part, the absolute best part, is after Swiss or Top Cut or whatever, we all go and have dinner, and
You get our chicken tendies.
That's my favorite part of the day.
Bro, that barbecue joint we went to in San Diego, I don't even remember the name, but that was so good.
I think it's like Just Joe's, or I don't know what it's called.
I
But
don't
anyways,
even remember.
yeah, yeah. But the food That's one of the best parts.
Oh yeah, after event dinners are always just some of the best times because it doesn't matter how good, how bad you did at an event. You're with all your friends, maybe you guys get a couple drinks in. Everybody's having a good time. Those are definitely by far what I miss most about events.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so transitioning here, we're gonna just cover quickly two events that happened this weekend. We have a core TCG event and a PPG event. We don't have the full deck lists, but we have just a little bit of info about each one. Tim, do you want to go over the core event a little bit and just kind of the final match, who was playing, and just kind of what we expected and didn't expect?
Yeah, so I unfortunately didn't get to watch like the whole event. I saw the last two rounds. The second to last round, the feature match was Dark Broly versus Red Broly Swap, so both set 11 decks. And it was a really close game, and Dark Broly ended up just being able to put more pressure in play. Because, I mean, when you can swing with
30Ks.
three 30Ks in a turn, and then the next turn swing with them again, get them off the board, and replay them, that's 6 30K attacks in one turn.
Yeah.
For 0 energy, which is kind of disgusting. So Dark Broly ended up taking that match. And then the finals was obviously the Dark Broly against Green Gotenks. So again, we had two set 11 decks. And Dark Broly ended up taking the W there also. And the playmaking card, which let him survive, happened to be Petrification. And I know, Caleb, you know I love that card. I was all over that Vegas weekend.
Bro, I don't even remember what that card does.
It's the negate for black, where you pitch a card and you choose like another, I think it's just battle card, and it can't attack or activate skills for the turn.
Oh, okay. Yeah. That's I can see how that would be good in Broly, Dark Broly.
Yeah. So him having that negate on his last turn won him the game.
Wow.
And then obviously,
what did he negate with it?
One of the, so he had 2 Gotenks on board. I don't remember if they were the anniversary box ones or ones from the new set, but he had 2 of them in play and a Unison. So Gotenk swung with one of his 2 Gotenks cards, and then it got petrification, and he froze the other one.
Okay.
So then all he had basically was his Unison and leader attack, and he was still at 4 life. Dark Broly was.
I mean, it's a solid card.
So,
especially if opponent had like Cell there.
Yeah.
You have that card in hand, you can stop both attacks.
Yep. So yeah, that I've been looking more at that deck. I know, Caleb, we've talked about it a lot, and my general consensus has been I don't understand how it works, but I've been looking at it a lot more, and I'm starting to figure it out and realize that it's kind of busted.
Well, one of the things that kind of triggered my eye to keeping an eye on Dark Broly was that if I'm correct here, don't quote me, but I'm pretty sure the Brolys, the ones that attack, get to play themselves for free.
Yeah, so there's 3 different 6 drops, and they're activate main to play them from drop. All you have to do is send 6 30Ks from drop to warp. No energy, nothing.
Yeah, it's kind of like a mini reverse overrun.
Right.
Which is absurd.
Right. And also, like Tim said earlier, swinging with 30Ks, it's kind of like the Vegex effect, like,
it's basically like U3, but on one card.
Right, but then the 30K power is super relevant because if they basically have to combo like 5 cards to get out of it.
Yeah, so if all you have is 0/5s, it takes 4 cards to combo out of one attack.
Right.
Well, you look at a deck like Kidku, like when Kidku is super strong, and Kidku is still strong now. But anytime you get a 30K vanilla out, you swing with it. If your opponent doesn't like negate or block it, most of the time they're just going to take the damage because comboing out of a 30K attack isn't a very efficient use of like the cards in your hands unless you absolutely need to survive. but you're paying 2 energy for that. And then when you're able to play these 30Ks for free, all the best decks in the game typically are able to play past their energy curve. They're able to just span the board or just play a bunch of different threats for free, or they're able to like abuse their energy and untapping. You look at Storm or Super Shenron, the Jex. All these decks were able to just throw out a bunch of attackers for virtually no cost at all.
Right. Yeah. And that's kind of true for any game in general too, is the best, deck or whatever game, list or whatever is going to be the one that makes use of the rule set the best or walks the line of, breaking the rules.
Yep.
So I just want to point this out that for 1 energy, you can have a 40K double strike.
Yeah, that's better
That's
rate
good.
better rate than Mira.
That'll literally cost like an entire hand to combo out of that.
Yeah.
Yep.
Which is kind of dumb. So we'll see how that deck ends up panning out once we all have cards in hand and get more events going. But I think it's definitely going to be a top contender.
Yeah, and I think also the result here is not to discount Gotenks either, because I know, Russell, you've been playing that deck quite a bit, just in testing and whatnot. But it's pretty good. From what I hear.
Yeah, no, I really like Gotenks. I'm not sure. I'm assuming Core was best of 1. All these events have been best of 1. But I think best of 1 does change things too. The thing I like about Gotenks is it's just one of those toolboxy decks that can search out all its pieces. It just draws a lot of cards, and all of its threats, are very cheap. And when they come down, they draw you more cards. They KO cards. They take counters off of your opponent's unisons, and we know how strong unisons are. So when I'm able to get rid of your unison without even using up an attack or just having to throw like 1 attack at it, I'm probably going to be winning. If you're drawing a bunch of cards and efficiently getting rid of your opponent's threats, and then I just get to freely swing at your life, you just waste a lot of your opponent's resources, and Gotenks just recycles everything. You pop my threats, I get to grab back my pieces from the drop. Your negates are basically like green power bursts. So the deck just does a lot very well, and it gets around a lot of the issues that green had in past sets. Like green up until now has just like lost to Trunks counterplays because all our threats basically don't have deflect, and we have to tap at least 4 energy to like make a board. But now I can tap 2 energy, bring out a threat that draws me cards, and it has deflect, so you can't Trunks it. So Gotenks is looking very strong going into this next set.
Sweet. I'll definitely be looking out for some Gotenks. That's one of my favorite characters, so I'm into it.
Definitely. Yeah. Alrighty, so the next event we want to kind of talk about a little bit is not set 11, but it is the PPG DBS Premier Online Tournament. It had 124 players, which is, that's pretty good for an online event.
Yeah, especially considering it was a webcam event. That's a lot of players.
Right, yeah. And so just looking at the pie chart here of the Top Cut, they had 10 different decks in Top Cut out of, I think it was like 16 players or something like that, but 10 different decks.
That's some really good diversity.
But we still do see, the primary deck was Vegex. I think they were playing post-ban rules. I'm not sure.
They were pre-ban.
Pre-ban. Oh, okay, so that makes sense. And then we had Reboot Gohan and Invoker next, which also makes sense. But some of the things I just wanted to note about this tournament was the diversity, super healthy, because people are kind of learning how to play against Vegex with, sideboard decks like Jocko and that sort of thing.
These best of 1 events are always interesting because you look at a deck like Teen Gohan, and typically Teen Gohan is not a bad deck in best of 3 events, but you don't typically see it win best of 3 events or play super high consistently, just because in best of 3 events you're able to adjust, and you have your sideboard, and there's a lot of sideboard cards that are very efficient against a deck like Teen Gohan. And then you go into these best of 1 events, and you can main deck these cards against Gohan and improve your Gohan matchup. But then versus all the other array of the decks like Zamasu, Vegex, the yellow go tanks. You suffer when you side in all these different types of negates that don't really promote your game plan versus other decks, just to beat one deck. And that's where you see a deck like Team Gohan able to just kind of come in and like clean house, because it doesn't have to worry about your opponent being able to adjust and have a clean game 2 and 3.
Exactly. But I do kind of like that about the online events, because it's our only form of play right now. And they do take more time, in real life versus like a regular game, because it's just, having to know all the hotkeys and clicking and just technical difficulties. And so they take more time. And if you were to do best of 3, I think the round would be like, they do 60-minute rounds, but I know that ends in a lot of ties. So
Yeah.
like realistically, they should be like, 80-minute rounds or something.
Yeah.
Which if you did 6 of those in a day, you're looking at like 8 hours of gameplay. But best of 1 is cool, not only for the meta, just to kind of encourage diversity a little bit, and then also just for everyone's personal time, because we all want to have fun still. So we don't want to, give up our entire day sometimes.
Definitely.
So yeah, that was our competitive events. So we're just gonna talk about a couple of other things that can either hinder people from having fun while being competitive, or sometimes it is fun. Things like playtesting and then like rule sharking are those. I think those are the 2 topics that kind of come to mind when people either are having fun or not having fun, if they're trying to be competitive, that is. And so I just wanted to cover playtesting first and kind of ways to make it more fun, because sometimes it can get a little dry. But I think playtesting is one of my most fun times when I'm actually just playing the card game, because one of the things me and Tim do is we play what's called open face or open handed. And so we'll both play with our, hands face up, and we'll go over just things that we think the opponent should do versus things we think we should have done. And it actually makes it a little bit more fun in the sense that you don't have this feeling of, oh, I lost because I misplayed,
Yeah.
and
So
you get to kind of talk about things.
that's really, it's more important when you're testing like new decks versus decks that you're, seasoned with and you've played a lot. I mean, it's still fun to do with decks that you're used to anyways, because you can always learn like new lines of play and new ways of sequencing, and your opponent's always going to think differently than you do. So getting that extra perspective is always good.
No, I'm definitely a big fan of testing open-handed. Like, even if you are seasoned with the deck, there's a lot of people that really like to latch on to a certain color or play style, and they tend to just kind of like play that typical type of deck each format. So even if you're really comfortable with your deck, when you go open-handed like that and you get to test against different decks, then you get to kind of talk with your friends, teammates, whoever, and see their train of thought with that type of deck. So then going into a big event, when you go against a certain deck, even though you may not have played that deck yourself, you kind of have an idea of what your opponent is thinking and what their line of plays are going to be. So it just gives you more diversity in knowledge, even if you don't play that deck.
Yeah, it's a really good tool, and it makes playing competitive a little bit more fun when you kind of know the mindset of the opposing decks, and kind of what their game plan is going to be on a mental level. And so, so moving on, something that makes competitive gaming not as fun, especially to people that are just getting into it, I would say is rule sharking, and it's probably the number one thing that I think like at locals will stir people away from a game like Dragon Ball or whatever.
There
And so
was
I just kind of
quite a big thread on this a few days ago.
Yeah, I think on the main page someone was talking about I forget what the discussion was, but do you remember, Tim?
I think it was, I don't remember who it was, but I think it was like player A missed an auto that would trigger at the end of turn, and it ended up like costing him the game because he didn't have a blocker or something like that, and his opponent knew but didn't say anything because it's not his auto. It's not his trigger. He doesn't need to say anything.
Right.
Or at least from my perspective, that's how I feel about it. You should be in charge of your own triggers.
Actually brings up an interesting topic of like, should, like obviously you just said you should be in charge of your own triggers, but should player B, or the one that's, the opponent to that person, get penalized for not reminding the other person? What do you guys think about that?
So
I think it's
Go ahead,
very
Russell.
interesting, because I did hear that whole situation that happened with these two players, but I didn't get to see it for myself, so I can't 100% like confirm everything that happened. So you guys can correct me if I'm wrong. But from what I heard, it wasn't a type of situation like with East Kai where it's optional that you give something double strike. From what I understand is what happened was the trigger that the person missed wasn't an optional thing. It was something that it was the Bardock, right? The Bardock, the Resolute or whatever. The opponent activates a counter. From what I was told, it's not like an optional trigger where it's like, oh, I can restand him if I miss it. Once you activate a counter, the Bardock restands. It's not an optional thing. And from what I heard, his opponent, therefore, after that turn, said, "Hey, you had game because your Bardock should have restood." So that is kind of like a little gray area, because it's not like East Kai where you don't have to say anything. I have a very strong opinion when it comes to rule sharking, because first and foremost, this is a card game, and I play it because I love to have fun. I'm a very competitive person. Everybody knows that. I hate to lose. But you don't need to shark people when you know the intention in order to win. And I bring this up all the time, not to toot my own horn or anything. But when I won my first regionals and went undefeated, it was like round 2, and my opponent, it was like his second turn. We've already played, we've already drawn cards, and he had 9 life out, and he noticed it, and he was like, "Hey, I have 9 life." He's like, "What does this mean? Do I just lose this game?" I told him, I was like, "Just take a life, you pick it, shuffle it back into your deck, let's keep playing." Because personally for me, like, I know he didn't intend, it was an accident. I know he didn't intend to have 9 life out there, and I just wanted to play the game. I want to have fun, and I ended up still winning that match, and I ended up going undefeated and winning that regionals. I see a lot of people just trying to abuse the rules in order to, benefit themselves. Like, East Kai is the number one thing. Like, as a player, yes, you should remember your triggers, and if it happens to you, if you get rule shark, number one, that's on you because you forgot. So always remember your triggers. But as a player, like, the person's intention, and I just don't really understand how someone can feel good about winning that way. Personally, in my opinion, if you have to rely on winning a game that way, then you're probably not the greatest player in the first place. So yeah, I have very strong feelings about this topic.
So I agree with you on almost all of that, but there's part of me that disagrees a little bit, and that's strictly because of my card game background being Magic. In older formats, there's a very popular sideboard card called Chalice of the Void, and that basically what it says is its mana cost is XX. So that means if you want it to be played with 1 counter, you have to pay 2 mana for it. And the text on the card says counter every spell with the mana cost of the number of counters on it. And it's for both players. So a lot of times what people will do is what's called chalice checking your opponent. So say my opponent plays the Chalice of the Void on 1, and I go to play a 1 mana spell. If my opponent doesn't call that trigger to counter the spell, even though it's mandatory, it's missed. It's not a reversible thing. So a lot of times people do that just to check and see if their opponent remembers their triggers, and that it's not as, I guess, scummy as what people try to do with rule sharking in this game, I guess, because chalice checking is like a very common thing. Like, people know if you're playing that card in your 75, you're gonna get checked on it. Which I feel like is kind of the same thing with East Kai. If you're playing that over Champa, you should expect your opponent, if you don't say double strike, to only take 1 life.
So Chalice is a mandatory thing, right? It doesn't just automatically counter something?
So on the online Magic clients, it does, because obviously the rules are built into the game. But in paper, if the person with the Chalice of the Void in play doesn't say anything, then your spell resolves.
Yeah, so it's mandatory, but in Magic, there's things called miss triggers where if you miss something mandatory, it can just not happen because it's your fault. You forgot.
So that's more of my background on that topic. So, like I said, I agree with pretty much all of what you said, Russell, except for that one little bit, just because of my background from Magic and Chalice of the Void being
like I
something I
definitely
played
agree the
against a
fact
lot.
that as a player, it should always be on you to remember your stuff. You know, I'm someone who's always very meticulous in what I do, and I always like, you know, double check, triple check things in my head when I'm playing in a tournament. So, and someone that, you know, I prefer to play Isekai over something like Champa because I love that, you know, there may be that 1 in 100 scenario where not giving something double strike is beneficial to you. It may not come up often, but the fact that it's something that can come up is why I play Isekai, you know, and I always remember, you know, to announce my double strike. And I've never been rule strike for it because I've never messed up on it. But I also just kind of feel like if I'm playing in the game and I got to scenario, I'm sitting at 2 life and my opponent has game, you know, they outplayed me that game and they dumped their entire hand. I'm not just going to take 1 life and be like, you know what, you didn't call double strike, because the intention was there, you know, and I played that game and got myself into that position to where they beat me, you know. I could have played better and not been in that scenario, but I didn't. You know, if I'm at 2 life and opponent plays Isekai and dumps their entire hand, you know, the intention's there. And I lost that game. They played better than me. Yeah, they should remember their triggers, but they had game. You know, I'm not going to just take a life and be like, yeah, no, you didn't call double strike. You know, because
Right.
to me, winning off of a technicality like that, where all it took was 1 word, 2 words, and I lose, like that just doesn't. I don't know. That just doesn't really sit well with me.
Yeah.
Because to me personally, I prefer to win knowing that I outplayed my opponent.
Right. So I think the disparity here is one, the rules in Magic obviously different than the rules in Dragon Ball.
Very
Because in
different.
Dragon Ball, as long as like they're very forgiving in Dragon Ball. I think because I was kind of conflicted about this too, because it's like I want people to have fun, and I know some people don't realize certain things are like optional, I guess you should say. Like, for example, the biggest one is that I fall into is the Sin Shenron 9-drop, right? So a lot of people are like, oh, that card just blanks everything that enters. Well, it doesn't. It says choose. So you actually have to sit there and say, okay, I choose your card. I choose your card. I choose your card. But obviously, you know, that's everyone's intent is to just blank everything. And so one of the things I do is like to maintain fun for both of us plus competitiveness is I take it into like a little bit of a teaching moment, and I'm like, okay, hey, just to let you know, I don't know if you wanted to have this to happen or not, but did you want it to happen? You know, did you want to declare double strike, right? And then after that, I'll be like, okay, so you know you have to declare it, but I'm not going to remind you anymore, you know.
Yeah.
So
And
that's kind of what
I think that's perfectly fine, right?
Like the first
if you
time it
want to use it as a
happens,
teaching moment, like I think that's a great way to benefit both players, but not also just hold their hand throughout an entire match.
exactly.
yeah, especially with newer players. But I feel like with seasoned players, like we all know, but again, sometimes the pressure gets the better of us and sometimes we slip up.
Yeah.
But that's
I mean,
also
when
part
you're
of the game, right?
For sure. And at the end of it, we all get to, you know, have barbecue, which is fun.
Oh,
True.
yeah.
Okay, so moving forward, I just wanted to cover online events a little bit and just kind of get your guys' opinion on like the format and if the format itself is fun, and if it's not fun, how could it become fun? Just for the current conditions of like COVID and stuff. So like I guess currently most events are best of one, and they're on like Saturdays, right? And they're one day events with no top cut. So what do you
I'm
guys think? Do you
totally
think
fine
that's
with that.
the best format?
I'm fine with it. I think it'd be cool for maybe like local shops to host things like that, like during the week for their players, or, you know, try and do different times on the weekend so it's not conflicting with the large ones. But doing these online best of one events typically doesn't take a whole lot of time out of your day.
Yeah, a couple hours and you're done.
Yeah, I mean, given, you know, the situation the entire world is in, um, this is kind of like the best we can do right now. We don't have a dedicated, you know, online platform to play on that where like things are like automatically generated and games can go a lot quicker. You know, depending on the deck you're playing, you have to go through all the motions, and some decks require you to do a lot more actions online. And so just all that extra clicking can just take up a lot of unnecessary time, which is why best of one is kind of preferred, just because if you go best of three, I mean, you could be looking at extremely long rounds, especially if you went with the normal time frame. So many matches are going to be going into time, and there's going to be a lot more draws than normal. I know, like Tim said, my locals is actually doing online events every week, and we've been trying to keep that going for a while. Like personally for me, like I haven't played in quite a while just because I don't really like online best of one event. They're just like not as fun. Like I enjoy being able to sideboard and kind of like adjust through different matchups throughout a tournament, and I just don't like how die rolly best of ones can be. But they're fun, they're interesting. I'll tune into them. It's kind of hard to take best of one events seriously, but there's not much we can do about it given this pandemic we're all going through. But Bandai's trying, and all these shop owners and TOs are doing whatever they can to try and keep, gameplay going. And so with what we have, it's kind of the best we can do right now, and I'm okay with it.
Yeah, so I think like for a lot of shops, maybe a good idea is do just some night during the week, do your local best of one through Untap or whatever. Make it like top anywhere between the first place and top 4, get some amount of prizing, and just do like $5 to $10.
Yeah.
Maybe $5 because players aren't using the play space or things like that. Just do maybe even a little less prizing. But that also, it helps support your local game stores as well, which is super important during these times. That way they're there for us when we get back.
Yep.
Yep.
I think that's the number one thing. If you have a locals that you really care about, I'm not saying anybody should go out and break the bank. It's tough times. If you're hurting, don't spend any money that you don't need to spend. But if you have the means and a local store that you love and you want to be able to come back to, always support your locals.
Definitely. It doesn't even need to be like booster boxes. It can be literally something as small as like a pack of sleeves or a couple booster packs, something like that. Everything helps them.
Yep.
Yeah, so I think we can all basically agree that best of one is the best format for
online.
Dragon
100%.
Ball. Yeah, online, just because time, and it kind of keeps it diverse, which is actually really good for this current like era, because it keeps it fun. People are not like getting depressed about Vegex is the only deck in Top Cut or something like that.
Keep his name out of your mouth.
Anyways, I think that kind of wraps up our discussion for today. So we just want to finish with a little bit of bookkeeping. As many of you guys know, Russell is actually part of another podcast. So if you wanted to throw a little shout out there.
Yeah, so my good friends and hometown buddies, Scatter Report, we've been making videos for a long time. We've definitely slowed down a lot through COVID, just not being able to like meet up as much as we used to. But every once in a while, we throw out our podcasts. We love doing them. We've been doing them since like the beginning of this game, and it's a lot of fun. So yeah, next time we throw ours out within the next year, tune in, check it out. We have a lot of fun over there.
Yeah, so if you guys aren't already subbed to them, go check them out on YouTube, The Scatter Report. I think they're on Spotify as well. So give them a sub or a follow. If you guys are going to buy TCG cards, any card game you want, if you're going to use TCGPlayer, go ahead and click the link down below. We have an affiliate link. It just helps us keep things running. And we also have a merch store down below if you want to pick up a hoodie for the cold weather that's about to happen, or a t-shirt if you're still in the desert.
Yep.
And anything else, Tim?
I think just besides that, check out some of the other content creators for the game. We've got Marcus with his Twitch stream. I think it's like Tuesday through Thursday or something. All the different YouTube channels, Android, Eggman, Worlds TCG, other podcasts like Russell said, Scatter Report. Just help everyone, support making content for the game we all love.
Alrighty, this is the Sideboard Podcast. Checking out.
See ya.